Okay, boys and girls, this is part 2 of chapter 3, and I'm going to back up a paragraph so we can start back over. I was lying back in the soft hay. I folded my hands behind my head. I closed my eyes and let my mind wander back over the 2 long years. I thought about the fishermen, the blackberry patches, and the huckleberry hills. I thought of the prayer I said when I asked God to help me get 2 hound pups. I knew He had surely helped, for He had given me the heart, courage, and determination. Early the next morning, with the can jammed deep in the pocket of my overalls, I flew to the store. As I trotted along, I whistled and I sang. I felt as big as the tallest mountain in the Ozarks. Arriving at my destination, I saw 2 wagons that were tied up at the hitching rack. I knew some farmers had come to the store, so I waited until they left. As I walked in, I saw my grandfather behind the counter, tugging and pulling. I worked my can out of my pocket, and dumped it out in front of him and looked up. Grandpa was dumbfounded. He tried to say something, but it wouldn't come out. He looked at me, and he looked at the pile of coins, and finally, in a voice much louder than he ordinarily used, he asked, "Where did you get all of this?" "I told you, Grandpa," I said. "I was saving my money so that I could buy 2 hound pups, and I did. And you said you would order them for me. I've got the money, and now I want you to order them." Grandpa stared at me over his glasses, and then back at the money. "How long have you been saving this?" he asked. "A long time, Grandpa," I said. "Well, how long?" he asked. I told him 2 years. His mouth flew open, and in a loud voice he said, "2 years?" I nodded my head. The way my grandfather stared at me made me uneasy, and I was on pins and needles. Taking his eyes from me, he glanced back at the money. He saw the faded yellow piece of paper sticking out of the coins. He worked it out, asking as he did, "What's this?" I told him that it was the magazine ad telling where to order my dogs. He read it, turned it over, and glanced at the other side. I saw the astonishment leave his eyes and the friendly old grandfather look come back. I felt much better. Dropping the paper money, I'm going to start over. Dropping the paper back on the money, he turned and picked up an old turkey feather duster and started dusting where there was no dust. He kept glancing at me out of the corner of his eye as he walked slowly down to the other end of the store, dusting here and dusting there. He put the duster down, came from behind the counter, and walked up to me, laying a friendly old work callous hand on my head. He changed the conversation altogether, saying, "Son, you need a haircut." I told him I didn't mind. I didn't like my hair short. The flies and the mosquitoes bothered me. He glanced down at my bare feet and said, "How come your feet are cut and scratched like that?" I told him it was pretty tough picking blackberries barefoot. He nodded his head. It was too much for my grandfather. He turned and walked away. I saw his glasses come off and the old red handkerchief come out. I heard the good excuse of blowing his nose. He stood for several seconds with his back toward me. When he turned around, I noticed his eyes were moist. In a quavering voice he said, "Well, son, it's your money. You worked for it and you worked hard. You got it honestly, and if you want some dogs, we're going to get those dogs." He walked over and picked up the ad again, and he asked, "Is this 2 years old too?" I nodded yes. "Well," he said, The first thing we have to do is write this outfit. There may not even be a place like this in Kentucky anymore. After all, a lot can happen in 2 years." Seeing that I was worried, he said, "Now you go on home. I'll write to these kennels, and I'll let you know when I get an answer. If we can't get these dogs right here, we can get them someplace else. And I don't think, if I were you, I'd let my pa know anything about this right now. I happen to know he wants to buy that red mule from old man Potter." I told him I wouldn't say a word, and I turned to leave the store. As I reached for the door, my grandfather said in a loud voice, "Say, it's been a long time since you've had any candy, hasn't it?" And I nodded my head yes. He asked, "How long?" I told him, "It's been a long time." "Well," he said, "we'll have to do something about that." Walking over behind the counter, he reached out and got a sack. And I noticed it was not one of those nickel sacks. It was one of those quarter kind. My eyes never left Grandfather's hand. Time after time he dipped it in and out of the candy counter. Peppermint sticks, jawbreakers, bubble gum, and gumdrops. The sack bulged. So did my eyes. Handing the sack to me, he said, "Here. The first big coon you catch with those dogs, you can pay me back." And I told him I would. On my way home, with a jawbreaker in one side of my mouth and a piece of bubble gum in the other, I skipped and hopped, making half an effort to try to whistle and sing, but I couldn't for the candy. I had the finest grandpa in the entire world, and I was the happiest boy in the entire world. I wanted to share my happiness with my sisters, but decided not to say anything about ordering the pups. Arriving home, I dumped the sack of candy out on the bed. 6 little hands helped themselves. I was well repaid by the love and adoration I saw in the wide blue eyes of my 3 little sisters. Now, that is the end of chapter 3, but I have a few things I want to go over before I end our recording today. In this chapter, we had 4 new characters introduced. Billy's grandpa, who was the owner of the local general store, and I showed you a picture of what that would look like inside. See how it looked on the outside, and in a general store, they sell everything. They sell everything from fabric to food. You see a chicken coop right here, and you see a rocking chair. And we also had Billy's 3 little sisters, and they were mentioned briefly when he shared his quarter bag size of candy. Now, in chapter 2 and at the beginning of chapter 3, Billy was only 10 years old. And at the end of chapter 3, Billy is now 12 years old. It has taken him 2 years to save $50 from doing many different odd jobs. Now, what I want you to think about, I want you to think about the amount of money that you may earn for an allowance from your parents or grandparents each week. When I was a little girl your age, my mom and daddy paid me $1 a day during the week to make up all the beds, to take out the trash, and to clean up the bathroom. So I made $5 a week. I bet Billy wished he made that much. Now I want you to think about the amount of money that your family members or your friends give you at Christmas. And do you think it would take you 2 years to save like Billy did to have just $50 in your piggy bank? Think about that for just a second. It took him 2 years to save $50, and sometimes he only got paid 10 cents a job, an odd job that he did. And one last thing I want you to think about, a question from Miss Lynn's. Why do you think Grandpa said he would write a letter to the kennel outfit in Kentucky instead of calling them on the telephone? And I'm going to show you a picture of a 1930s telephone. Why do you think he would rather write a letter, put a stamp on it, and put it in the mail? Wouldn't using a phone instead of writing a letter be faster? Think about that. And that's what letters used to look like. Look at that neat handwriting. Oh, I wish I could write that neat. And lastly, before I end tonight, I wanted to get a little head on my recordings of where the red fern grows. So I recorded these on tonight is Tuesday night to have them ready for you first thing Wednesday morning. And if you've heard any whistles or words being spoken over my vocabulary lesson and my 2-chapter readings, it was from our 26-year-old African gray parrot, Merlin. Here's a picture. That's not really Merlin right there, but that's what he looks like. He's our pet. And Merlin can speak in Mrs. Schlinz's voice and in Mr. Schlinz's voices. He rings like the telephone. He whistles the Andy Griffith Show theme. And when we play music for him, he dances. So I apologize in advance for Merlin's interruptions. And one last heads up, let me go back to that slide all the way back up to the top. Here's a heads up. At the end of chapter 4, you will have a test over the first 4 chapters, and this will be for a recorded grade. And I just finished your Wednesday read aloud of chapter 3. So if you need to go back to Friday's recording and Tuesday's recording and today's, and then read the 4th chapter on Thursday, you may need to do so. And good luck, and I will talk to you later.